Good morning, Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen. The Embassy of Brazil in Copenhagen, with institutional support from the Danish Agricultural and Food Council, Food Nation, DACOFO, and the Brazilian Trade and Investment Promotion Agency, Apex Brazil, would like to welcome you to the conference, Brazilian and Danish Contribution to the Challenge of Sustainable Food Supply, here at the Chamber of Commerce, Brugsen in Copenhagen. In today's morning program, we will have an opening session and keynote speakers, followed by two panels. To open the conference, we call Rodrigo Azeredo dos Santos, Ambassador of Brazil, and Steen Hummel, State Secretary for Trade and Global Sustainability, Ministry of Foreign Affairs of Denmark.
Good morning. First of all, thank you so much for all of you for being here, especially the Brazilian delegation that came specially for this event. Your Excellency, Governor Mauro Mendes from the state of Mato Grosso. State of Mato Grosso is the largest and most important agricultural state in Brazil, so we have the pleasure and the honor of having Governor Mauro Mendes here. Your Excellency, Senator Irajá Silvestre Filho, also it's a pleasure and an honor to have you here for another important state of agricultural state in Brazil, Tocantins. Also, I'd like to thank the presence and the cooperation of Your Excellency, Ambassador, State Secretary Steen Hummel. Your Excellencies, colleagues, ambassadors, thank you for joining us. Dear Mr. Fernando Camargo, Vice Minister of Agriculture for Innovation from the Minister of Agriculture, Livestock and Food Supply of Brazil. Dr. Celso Moretti, President of Embrapa, thank you so much. Also, Mr. Jesper Pedersen, Head of Department of the Minister of Food and Agriculture and Fisheries of Denmark. Thank you also for your cooperation, for joining us. Also, I'd like to, of course, thank our partners and co-organizers, the Brazilian Trade and Investment Promotion Agency, Apex Brazil, a constant partner of the Brazilian Minister of Foreign Affairs, represented here by its Brussels officer, Mr. Bruno Capuzzi. Thank you, Bruno, for your support. And of course, from the Danish side, the Danish Agriculture and Food Council, represented here by the Executive Director, Mr. Flemming Pedersen. Thank you so much, Mr. Pedersen. Also, Director Ian Lawson. Where is Lee? Thank you so much. It's been very, very helpful in the organization of this event. And as well by the Executive Director of Innovation of its research center, SEGIS, Ms. Elizabeth Henriksen. Thank you so much for being here. DACOFO, of course, the Danish Feed and Grain Association. I thank particularly its Chief Policy Advisor, Klaus Eriksen, and consultant also Emil Hansen, who helped us secure this magnificent venue, and of course, Food Nation, whose CEO, Liz Wobon, graciously agreed to be one of our moderators today, specifically in the afternoon. I must also thank the institutions that came from Brazil, that are joining us on a long trip from Brazil. Of course, also, I mentioned Embrapa, but also the Confederation of the National Agriculture and Livestock of Brazil, CNA. Lígia, thank you so much for being here. The Conserve, Produce and Include program of the state of Mato Grosso. Also, Fernando Sampaio, thank you. The Association of Soy and Corn Producers of Mato Grosso. INSPER, School of Economics, Business Law and Engineering. Thank Marcus Young, friend for a long time, friend and an expert on the topics that we are going to discuss here. Also, Agroecony. Thank you, Rodrigo Lima, also for joining us, an important think tank and consultancy in Brazil. And University of São Paulo with Exalc. Thank you so much for also joining us. And Abrapa, the Brazilian Association of Cotton Producers, and last but not least, the Beef Institute of Mato Grosso. So you see that it's a large group from Brazil. It's a top group of experts, and I'm sure they are going to share with you what Brazil is doing in terms of sustainable agriculture. That's going to be very important for our dialogue. But I also would like to pass the floor, please, to Ambassador Steen Hommel, and then I'll come back to say just a few words to you again. Ambassador, please.
Thank you. Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen, a very good morning to you all, not least to our visiting delegation from Brazil. Just listen to you, Ambassador, listing up the capacities in the room. I think this sounds well for a important dialogue we can have throughout the day. Thank you, Ambassador, again for allowing me to address this conference on sustainable food production, which comes at a critical time, only a few days ahead of the COP26 in Glasgow. Our planet is not only facing a climate crisis, but also a biodiversity crisis, and sustainable food production spans both of these crisis areas. Denmark is very committed to lead the fight to stop climate change and restore balance to our planet. This means investing in climate adaptation, protecting and restoring nature, biodiversity, and conversion of environmental friendly agricultural methods and techniques, all while maintaining a strong focus on the poorest and most vulnerable groups. To underline our commitment, allow me to refer to the new Danish strategy for development cooperation, The World We Share, which was recently announced and launched. The strategy underscores the need to preserve and restore our planet's resources and stresses that Denmark will work to ensure that agricultural goods are produced in a sustainable and healthy way. This means, for example, without causing deforestation in producer countries that damage the climate, biodiversity, and social conditions. Illustrating our willingness to walk the talk, the Danish government has decided that from 2023, at least 30% of our assistance to developing countries will be dedicated to climate and environment. We also have set a very ambitious sub-target that at least 60% of all grant-based climate finance will be dedicated to adaptation, so only to adaptation. By setting these concrete targets, we hope to inspire others and strengthen our collective response to the multiple crises facing our planet. But traditional development assistance is not enough if we are to deliver on the United Nations Sustainable Development Agenda by 2030. Key SDG targets on climate change, sustainable food production, biodiversity, and deforestation call for new and innovative partnerships, not least when it comes to global trade. Engaging private businesses in realizing the SDGs and leaving no one behind through sustainable and responsible trade is a strong force, and we can lead to a positive change for people, planet, and also increase profits. Fortunately, we are starting to see how corporate sustainability is becoming a competitive advantage. It's becoming a license to operate. This is very positive, but may not take us all the way. There is an important role for governments and regulators to play here, upholding the UN guiding principles on business and human rights and the OECD guidelines for multinational enterprises. We must push for a comprehensive framework for green and just future for all people on this planet. Denmark is a frontrunner. I already mentioned our development cooperation strategy. Earlier this year, we launched a new SDG action plan with a strong focus on sustainable and responsible business conduct in support of the SDGs. Most recently, the Danish Action Plan on Deforestation and Biodiversity places emphasis on making global supply chains more sustainable. We are relying on a continued good cooperation with you, and that means all in this room, but actually globally, to deliver on the SDGs by jointly striving to make our trade ties more sustainable. All of us here today in this room, and I think beyond this room, are fully aware of the global demand for food that is set to increase by 70% by 2050. This is putting a heavy strain on natural resources. And we are fully aware that climate change and diversity loss is threatening the livelihoods of many people who rely directly on nature for their survival. One thing is certain, we cannot meet the global food demand if we do not invest in climate adaptation through green agricultural production. Action needs to be taken to protect and restore nature and ecosystems. This means not least eliminating deforestation, while at the same time discussing how to convert to climate-smart agricultural green production. In 2021, there is no room for illegal deforestation. If our food production value chains are not deforestation-free, they are simply not sustainable. Denmark very much welcomes the dialogue with Brazil on transforming the agricultural sector into a green and climate-friendly sector. But much work needs to be done. Stopping deforestation is key to halting climate change. Primary forests store carbon and absorb much of a quarter of human-related emissions. These carbon stores are also more resilient to drought, fire, and other threats arising from climate change. Protecting forests does not only keep carbon safely stored, it also maintains a vital habitat for biodiversity in a time where millions of species face extinction, and it's also part of minimizing the risk of newly zoonotic disease spilling over to humans. It is therefore also understandable that law projects currently in Congress and declared priorities of the Brazilian government regarding easing of environmental licensing, economic exploration of indigenous land, and land tenure regulation have given rise to considerable concern, given that their potential for negative impact on the environment and rights on indigenous people. However, we put our trust in the words said by the Brazilian president at the virtual Global Climate Leaders Summit in April, emphasizing commitment to net zero deforestation by 2030 and pledge to double Brazil's environmental enforcement budget. As it stands today, the way we produce food is threatening the forests. Far too much forest cover is lost globally each year, being cleared and converted into agricultural land for soy, livestock, cocoa, coffee, palm oil, and more. It is time that we look at alternatives to convert farming by producing green and sustainable agricultural crops, for example, by replacing soya proteins with grass proteins or similar. Thus, there is a clear need for a country like Brazil, a global agricultural superpower and home to essential forest, to be key partner in reversing the global trend and put concrete actions behind global commitments and stop climate change and deforestation. And to do just that, Denmark remains a steadfast partner, and we appreciate this conference as a valuable platform. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you, Mr. State Secretary. I just would like to highlight some points that will be covered here later on in more detail. Well, first of all, I would like to call your attention, of course, to the very good timing of this conference. We are approaching, of course, next week, COP26, under high expectations of sustainable development and climate action. Also, a few weeks ago, State Secretary mentioned Denmark approved, and Danish Parliament, the action plan to reduce greenhouse gas emissions in agriculture and forest sectors to help the country reach the 2030 climate targets. And last week, Brazil has officially launched the second phase of our low-carbon agriculture policy for the next 10 years. We have the first phase for 10 years, and now we just launched for the next 10 years, which aims also to contribute to CO2 emissions reductions of 1.1 billion tons, also helping Brazil to reach its targets under the 2030 climate agenda. Also, I'd like to mention to you, of course, the objectives of this conference, which are the following. First of one, conveying the message with facts and figures that Brazilian sustainable agriculture is a success case and contributes to food security in the country and the worldwide. And also to explain and to bring the updated information of what's going on in the Amazon and with the deforestation, what Brazil is doing, our action to stop the illegal, of course, actions in the Amazon region, especially in deforestation. Also exchanging information with the Danish side about governmental and private policies, actions to promote sustainable agriculture. This is going to be the first part of our conference. And last but not least, also to open the doors for bilateral cooperation amongst government agencies, private companies, think tanks, R&D institutions, including universities, research centers, and agri-techs. In a world under increasing pressure to meet the growing global demand for food in a sustainable way, the Brazilian success case stands as a unique singular achievement and for sure will play a key role to help supplying food to a world population that will reach, as we know, according to the estimates, to 9 to 10 billion people in the next 30 years. Most of these people will be part of a growing urban population with higher average income. According to FAO, UN Agency for Food and Agriculture Organization, in comparison with today's food production, the world will have to produce 50% more of grains and 2 times today's production of proteins. Brazil is one of the countries that may contribute the most to cope this world challenge because of its large availability of arable land, which has not been used yet. This is very important to highlight. With no need of deforestation. We have 90 million hectares of arable lands that have not been used yet, with no need of deforestation to increase our agricultural production. 90 million hectares. Today, we use around 70 million hectares for cropland. So actually, we could increase our crop production in more than 100%, not counting the high productivity allowed by 2 or 3 harvests that in the same land, which is very common in various regions of Brazil. So together with the high productivity and the availability of croplands, Brazil really plays a very important role to help food security to the world in the next decades. It's very important to highlight that over the last 50 years, Brazil has transformed itself from a net food importer to the world's #1 net food exporter, according to FAO as well, using only a fraction of its territory for agriculture. We use less than 8%, 7.8% of the territory is dedicated to croplands, and preserving 66 or 67% or 2/3 of our native vegetation. The reasons behind the success of the Brazilian agriculture are the following. Of course, #1, natural comparative advantages, land availability, plenty of water supply, and good weather conditions. But also the high productivity that I have mentioned, thanks to large investments in R&D to develop a competitive and sustainable agriculture. And thanks a lot for Embrapa's work on R&D in the last decades, developing new crops that Dr. Moretti will explain in more detail this afternoon. Also, technical and financial support to family-based agriculture through cooperatives and family units. And also a very successful and competitive private business model throughout the agro-industry supply chain. So these are the reasons that explain this Brazilian success in agriculture. As a result, grain production since the late 70s increased by more than 400%, 420% increase in the productivity, while the cultivated area grew by just over 40%. In livestock, production results are equally impressive in terms of productivity. So we are talking in Brazil for many years, for decades now, about degraded pasture recovery and integrated crop, livestock, and forest systems, which also will be part of the speakers' comments later on. And some of the techniques Brazil has adopted for decades, they are now being discussed in Europe. So it's good to have this dialogue as well to show our experience with these techniques. Of course, we do have big challenges to address, especially related to the balance between socio-economic development and environment preservation. It's very important to make it clear that the challenges we face reducing illegal deforestation, mentioned by the Secretary of State, are not linked to our competitive and sustainable agriculture. Brazil has a very strict environmental legislation and forest codes that limit the use of land by farmers. As close they are from a forest, less land they can use for cropland or livestock. Sometimes they have to reserve 80% of the land for the natural coverage for forest. So headlines about Amazon biome, which is an area larger than the European Union, with a population of 23 million people, inhabitants, are sometimes misleading and linking deforestation to the Brazilian agriculture in general. In fact, most of the problems of deforestation in the Amazon region are related to illegal logging, illegal mining, and unfortunately, wrong agricultural techniques used by a small group of family-based agriculture around the region of Amazon. We call it the slash and burn activities. This is what we have to tackle. And we have identified this through satellite images. We know exactly where they are. But the problem is that to enforce the legislation, we have to introduce pass some bills that were mentioned also by the State Secretary that sometimes are misunderstanding. We don't want to promote more people to come to Amazon. We are just going through a regularization of land property, which is very important because these people, they are in the informal economy. So we have to bring them to the formal economy, first of all, by giving them land title, which is, of course, under supervision. Only people that are there since 2008. This will be explained by the Brazilian speakers later on. To eliminate this slash and burn technique. So we bring them to the formal economy so we can give them the right technical support, as we did in the south of Brazil, which was a very successful case, as I mentioned before, and also to help with the financing. So by tackling this problem, that's why we are so ambitious, and we believe we really can do it, as the President mentioned in the Climate Summit, Leaders Climate Summit organized by the US President some month ago, to reach the target of having zero deforestation, illegal deforestation by 2030. So Brazil is also open to international cooperation and partnerships, of course, and based on a transparent dialogue, that's exactly what we're doing here today. And that's it, like we would like to promote our bilateral cooperation with Denmark. I'm sure there will be a lot to learn from each other, some experience, and I'm sure this conference will be a very good start for it. Thank you so much.
Now we are honored to call Mauro Mendes, Governor of the state of Mato Grosso, as today's first keynote speaker. The governor will speak in Portuguese, so please use your translation devices. Thank you.
Cadê a... Tá pronta a apresentação?
Short presentation from the... Okay, sorry.
Bom dia a todos. Quero cumprimentar todos os presentes aqui.
I'd like to greet all of you present here and to thank everyone who honor us with your attendance in this room, especially to our senator, the representatives of the Brazilian Commission who are following us along this trip and who will also be participating in Glasgow in this important world event, which represents the efforts we all should do in favor of sustainability and climate of our planet. And today we will joyfully speak addressing you.
Que é no Brasil estado que é o grande produtor, o maior produtor brasileiro das chamadas commodities agrícolas, e esse Estado faz isso dentro de conceitos e princípios sobre os quais estarão assentados os nossos diálogos aqui hoje, e é a grande preocupação do mundo e de todos nós brasileiros. O Estado de Mato Grosso, ele tem no coração central da América do Sul, na região oeste do nosso país, uma das economias agrícolas mais competitivas do planeta. Nós somos hoje um grande produtor dessas principais commodities agrícolas e fazemos isso respeitando o nosso ambiente, preservando grande parte do nosso território, e fazemos isso, né, porque acreditamos que esse é um caminho que não tem mais volta, não tem como mais, como já foi dito aqui muito bem pelos dois representantes do governo brasileiro, nosso embaixador, e também pelo secretário que nos antecedeu, que a economia agrícola e a própria atividade humana, ela tem que continuar se desenvolvendo, adotando cada vez mais esse respeito ao meio ambiente e considerando esta nova realidade para que a humanidade possa prosseguir rumo ao futuro. Hoje aqui eu gostaria de apresentar aos senhores um pouco da nossa estratégia
Today,
de
I'd like to
crescimento.
show you a bit of our growth strategy concerning the state economy, and also to talk to you about our neutral carbon program, so we can bring carbon emissions to a zero until the 30s. Most countries are undertaking this commitment of neutralizing carbon emissions until the year 2050. Whereas the state of Mato Grosso has undertaken a commitment of bringing all emissions from our economic activity until the year 2035. And this is what we will be talking about from now on.
Por favor. Bom, todos conhecem muito bem.
So we are all aware of the efforts the world has been developing in order to bring these emissions to an end.
We all know these commitments by
But
everybody.
most of all, this
We
is a
have
commitment
a commitment that have to be
that has to be undertaken by the citizens, since this is an effort that no
that we
one
have to
can
be
neglect.
committed to. We cannot be negligent towards these objectives, towards these goals. The goal is being taken by the Brazilian government, and some of the states are committed to these goals to achieve net zero emissions until 2050. But Mato Grosso, as I said before, intends to have carbon neutral emission and achieve the reduction of carbon emissions and get to a 0 point in 2035. So this is 15 years before everybody else, those that have those commitments to 2050. Mato Grosso, we have 3 different biomes, and they are very clear. It is the Amazon biome, where we have part of the Amazon forest, who many have heard about. This is the upper part of our state. We have a native forest there that is very dense. We have the savanna, or cerrado, as we call in Brazil, which is a transition area. It is a range of land that is towards the middle of the map, and that connects to the Pantanal, which is an area on the lower part of the map, as you can see in the screen. Mato Grosso state is the only state in Brazil that have 3 different biomes that is clearly identified. This commitment that we have for carbon neutral in 2035 means that we have to commit and be working with different partners. And we work with different partners, and we have a great addition of these partners in this program.
Due to the COP27, we have decided to adhere to this new commitment, but mainly we want to focus most of our activities. Once we have to develop them and require behavioral changes, and these changes are already ongoing at this point in time. And this are happening according to 12 priorities so that we can reach these goals. And they are separated until the year 2030 and 2035. And by 2030, we want to have 80% of all emissions brought to zero. And until 35, we want to reach 100% of this goal. And the question is, why can we do this different? Why the Mato Grosso state believes that it can do this differently before what most have committed to be doing until the year 2035. This is just because we are doing things already. We are already carrying out all the necessary actions to reduce the emissions. They have actually started a few years ago. At this point in time, we have a very strong awareness by the economic sectors that are involved that we need, and we are in fact changing our production habits, mainly in agriculture. The Mato Grosso state is the biggest Brazilian producer, as I just mentioned to you. We produce nearly 75 million tons and within this decade until the year 2030, and according to projections, the productivity increase and the change of some areas that are meant for cattle production by adopting more technology in agriculture, we may be reaching the end of this decade by present nearly 120 to 130,000 tons. So according to today's figures, we could be the 4th world producer of food only in this state. And we are doing so by preserving 62% of our territory. The state of Mato Grosso, who has the main area of it correspond is just like it was 5 centuries ago. So we have 62% of native areas of savannas, forests, and all of our biomes. No regions in the planet have this has this environmental asset, nor does any part of the world produce the same amount of food that we produce. So this is the region of the world which produces the highest level of food according to environmental protection measures. And this is a big asset for us, and we want to carry on. And according to this strategy, and in order to reach a reduction until the year 2035, these two axes, one of which is to maintain our forest, our assets, and to keep this reduction in terms of deforestation. So today, the Brazilian government has a strong policy to fight against any illegal activity, but mainly they combat against any illegal deforestation. The Brazilian law is one of the most strict, if not the strictest law in the world when applicable in this Amazon forest, where we can only use 20% of the territory only, and a tremendous effort has been done in order to keep these figures. And from 2004, we have reached the top in terms of the deforestation, where most forests of our regions have been exploited. So this just goes to show that the economic activity has been increasing and that agriculture production has been increased while deforestation has been decreasing. This is why all of us have all of these assets, and apart from this, we will also have the opportunity of not only maintaining environmental assets, but also we have a recovery program for some areas that have been illegally affected throughout the years, and agricultures out of their own initiative or even in view of a legal imposition, they are being encouraged to recover and rebuild these forest assets that have been illegally eliminated. We have one slide before, if you please.
Isso. Não, o próximo, por gentileza. Isso.
Thank you.
Nós temos quase 8
So we have nearly 80 million hectares which will be transformed into the land, because most of this territory still depends on the so-called settlement, so that we may have a better control of all the activities developed in this territory. So this is why this regulation program, which is called Terra Limpo, Clean Land, where we've been investing nearly 70 million reais to implement this regulation, and we are issuing ownership properties, and this will allow the state to better control the territory and the activities that are developed there. We also have another program to develop the control, which is called the Rural Environmental Registry, the so-called CAR in Brazil. And this has the best performance in this activity. We are progressing very strongly through these controlling measures, and which will allow that in the next years all agricultural activity will be developed around or based in the Brazilian legislation, the so-called Brazilian Forest Code. So the state of Mato Grosso covers a big area where 3.5 million inhabitants reside. This state is bigger than 2 or 3 European Union countries. And one of our problems have to do with the so-called fires, forest fires, and a tremendous effort has been developed in order to cut them. These accidents result from human activity and also in indigenous reserves. These are practices that are traditional to this population in order to control according to their own rituals, and also for several reasons these can be transformed into big forest fires. This is why we have a strong program in order to reduce these forest fires, and by 2021 our performance was very heavy in reducing to nearly 60% when compared to last year's. And in the Amazon we also have had a big reduction, mainly in the area of Pantanal, where nearly 90% of these forest fires were reduced. And this just goes to show a bit of these three biomas where the Mato Grosso figures have always been above the average of the Brazilian states and the national average. And according to this recovery program for emission reduction, we intend to rebuild some areas, nearly 55,000 square kilometers. And this is an area which is bigger than Denmark, and we will have to rebuild, to bring back this effort, these areas, and bring the forest back here, because this forest has been illegally cut, and this will be done according to the new Brazilian legislation, and they will be restructuring these areas which were illegally affected. So this program is ongoing. Through the analysis that we make on our territory, we realize that a satellite system is able to detect in 25 hours any type of deforestation that is made inside our territory, which can be over 1 hectare. If anyone cuts the forest in an area above this threshold, will be detected by the satellite, and the Brazilian government will be able to take the necessary measures to avoid this situation. And this recovery effort is ongoing, and throughout the next years, it will be implemented by reaching this area of 55 square meters. On the other hand, we have a strong capacity to increase the growth of our production. As I referred to you a while ago, that until the end of this decade, until 2030, the state of Mato Grosso might be producing nearly 135 million tons. And this is a very relevant figure. This is something we will be achieved by keeping the 62% preservation of our territory. And this is why I told you, and I repeat and I insist, that this is the region of the plan which none of the biggest world producer of food, such as the US, Argentina, and China, has a geographic area with the same level of food production as we do in Mato Grosso, along with preservation policies. And this growth will be reached, and actually it will be explained by the speakers after me, and we will be growing in terms of technology, productivity, and in the by reversing some of these areas and converting them into agriculture fields. The next slide, please. The state of Mato Grosso is the second biggest state in our country in terms of integrating agriculture and livestock. This is something very important, because this brings a lot of environmental value. Our asset in the field is very big, and we have a great trend, so that in the next years we can go on fostering this type of integration, to have this area being used for agriculture as well as for livestock creation. This technology has emerged a few years back, and many Brazilian states are already using it, and the state of Mato Grosso is a great producer of agriculture areas, and also with our 31 million cattle, So we will be able to grow in this field, but we will be able to migrate from these big areas to and through using this technology and by applying this integration between agriculture and cattle and livestock creation or cattle breeding. On the other hand, the production of biofuels is something which is highly important and which is also included in our strategy. The state of Mato Grosso is the third biggest producer of ethanol in Brazil. We ranked at seventh position a few years back, but thanks to the new technology of producing ethanol through maize, we were able to increase and we are the biggest maize ethanol producer, and the production of biodiesel is also very relevant. And this is why these two biofuels are very strongly present in our economy, and they fall within the growth strategy of our energy patterns, and they all bring about concepts that are in line with the principles of sustainability. So today, in Brazil, we have nearly 10% of ethanol production, actually 86% of ethanol coming from maize in our country, and we will be growing a lot in this market until the year 2030 and we will have great capacity to export. Now, our strategy for the implementation of this policy depends on a strong partnership that the government of the state has undertaken with the private sector, the institutions representing productive sectors, such as the Federation of Industries, the Federation of Agriculture, and some of them are the Association of Soy Production, Cotton Production, the ruling sectors such as the Court of Audit and the Parliament. All of them are aligned with this commitment of carbon emissions that ought to be brought down. So we are open to partnerships from the outer world, because the assets we have in Brazil and mainly in the state of Mato Grosso, the environmental assets we have do play an important role to the planet. We do need to strengthen this exchange and to value this activity and food production in a highly sustainable manner, because this will be the way to go, the unquestionable way to go for the world. Personally, I consider that these commitments that are now being undertaken for the year 2050 seem to be too far away from now, because within 30 years many things can change, and if we want to reach these goals we have to do it quickly and urgently. Climate changes are being understood in the planet, and they will have serious consequences, and to hope for things to go on worsening, this is not a wise attitude, as this can bring very severe consequences for all of us. And this is why the Mato Grosso state is undertaking this commitment of reducing its emissions until the year 2035. And we are deeply convicted that we have all the conditions necessary to reach this goal. Actually, we are already walking along these lines. And this is why this program includes a seal for those who will bring resources to this program. And also, we will be identifying all all those who will be part of this program, from funders, from the supporters, the companies, sectors, industries that have undertaken this commitment, the ones who will develop their actions effectively in order for this goal to be achieved. So this recognition whereby our economy and our enterprises, our agriculture and our activities are being carried out and they are being developed along the lines of these positive contributions we want to give to the planet, and that this should be strongly acknowledged by our partners around the world. It is we are very much interesting that you that we convey this information to you. However, we know that negative information are circulating around the world. But on the other hand, we know that in my state, we have very important environmental assets and very important agriculture fields. So Mato Grosso has no doubt whatsoever in stating that we are the region of the planet that produces food along the lines of environmental friendly policy. Thank you.
As the next keynote speaker, we would like to call Senator Irajá Silvestre Filho, representing the Brazilian Inter-Party Group for Agriculture and Livestock.
Bom dia a todos. Eu gostaria inicialmente de agradecer
Good morning to all. I would like to acknowledge our Ambassador of Brazil in Denmark, Mr. Rodrigo Azevedo. Thank you very much for the invitation. It is an honor for me to take part in such a high, such an important event in Brazil, in Denmark, and internationally. I would also like to acknowledge the presence of the State of Trade from the Ministry of External Commerce of Denmark. It is also very important to meet the governor of the state of Mato Grosso, who is a neighbor state to mine, which is that of Tocantins. And I told him in private that I wondered that my state of Tocantins could have a governor like him, who is able to firmly govern the destination of the people of Mato Grosso. Congratulations for your actions. I would also like to thank the presence of Fernando Camargo, who is the Secretary of State of Innovation and also in the Ministry of Agriculture. It is also a pleasure to see you, and I would like to thank the Minister Teresa Cristina, and I would also like to greet Embrapa, who is also represented here, as it is a successful case to Brazil and to the world. And I would also like to thank the attendance of Mr. Serre, who represents the USB, one of the highly regarded institutions in Brazil, and all other institutions that are present here. Thank you for being here, and also for the importance that, which is indeed an honor for me to be here in Denmark, a country that I've always admired and respected. But before I enter into my topic, I would like to bring President Rodrigo Pacheco, the person that I represent in his capacity of the Secretary of State, and also by sharing with you the commitment that the country has been launched according to the discussions at the national level, according to the fabulous Senate, where the discussions around laws which will foster issues of sustainability. And this is why we would like to restate our desire of widening this discussion by bringing in the understanding and dialogue with all private and public institutions so that we can be even more accountable, both in the primary sector and in industry, the trade and service sectors.
Dentro da discussão dessa pauta que assumi a convite do
So,
nosso embaixador Rodrigo, a contribuição do Brasil, da Dinamarca para o
I should
desafio da
also
oferta alimentar sustentável.
talk to you about this
dentro
challenge
desse
of
ambiente,
the
desse
food
conceito, é importante
program
esclarecer às
between
senhoras e aos
Brazil
senhores
and
que o Brasil
Denmark. And it is important
possui
to
histórico
clarify,
relativamente
ladies and
novo
gentlemen, that
nesse
Brazil has
ambiente
a
na
new
produção de
history
alimentos.
in the
E essas
production of
ações, elas se dividiram
food. And
principalmente
these
em
actions
quatro
have
importantes
been divided
fases.
into
A primeira, a
four
Revolução
main
Verde, que nós
stages. The
chamamos,
first,
que veio
Green
após
Revolution,
a década de
which
40 da
came
Segunda
after the
Guerra
decade
Mundial.
of
Naquela época, por
100
incrível que
of
pareça, o Brasil
1940, after
era
the Second
grande
World War.
importador de
Brazil
alimentos no
was a
mundo.
great
Nós
importer
importávamos
of
naquela
food
ocasião
in the
arroz do
world. At that
Vietnã,
point in time,
feijão
we
do México,
imported
o leite aí
rice
da
from
própria Argentina, o
Vietnam,
país com o qual nós
bean from
fazíamos
Mexico,
divisa. E
milk
houve uma
from
decisão naquela
Argentina.
ocasião
And at
do
that point
governo,
in time, a
na
decision
época
was
ainda do
taken by the
presidente
government,
Que
when
nós
by
pudéssemos sair
President
dessa
Gazel,
condição de
that
dependentes
we
na produção de
should
alimentos, que o
no
país
longer
poderia sim ser
be
grande
dependent
celeiro na
on food
produção de
production, but
comida,
to
não
become
só para
a
o abastecimento
great
interno, mas também para
producer
exportar para o mundo.
for
E essa foi a
to
decisão
export
tomada
and
naquela
to
década de 70,
feed
quase
our country. And
40,
this was the
50 anos
decision we
atrás.
has taken
Isso só foi
nearly 40
possível,
to
em
50
grande
years ago.
parte,
And this has
graças
only
à
been
nossa Embrapa,
possible
através do
thanks
uso
to
da
our
tecnologia,
Embrapa
a
through the
implementação de
use of
ações como o
technology,
plantio
the
direto, o
implementation
uso
of
de
actions such as
fertilizantes
direct
para
planting and the
oferir maior
use of
produtividade na
fertilizers
nossa
in
produção de
order to
alimentos,
have highest
além de
levels of
outras
productivity
técnicas
in
de
food production,
mecanização,
apart
uso
from
de
other
fertilizantes que ainda
mechanization
eram
techniques and the
desconhecidas
use
naquela
of
década
pesticides,
de
which was
70.
still
Quando
unknown
nós
in
rompemos esse primeiro
the
ciclo da
70s.
Revolução Verde, nós
And when we
saltamos
cut
então
this
para a nossa
first
segunda
cycle of the
revolução,
Green
que foi
Revolution,
o uso
we
intensivo da
decided to
mecanização,
make an intensive
técnicas cada
use
vez mais
of
avançadas naquela época,
technology
ainda
with
na década de
by
80 para
adopting
90,
new
e,
techniques
por
during
incrível
the
que pareça,
80s
o uso
and
da
90s,
safrinha, né, como
and
um
the
segundo ciclo na
use
produção de alimentos,
and
porque
then a
até então
second
o
cycle
comum
of
era que houvesse
food
apenas um
production,
ciclo,
because so
né,
far
nos meses ali entre fevereiro e
we
março, a
had more
colheita
than
e a
one cycle,
propriedade praticamente
because
ficava ociosa durante os
we used
oito,
to
sete,
produce,
oito meses do ano.
and the
Quando
land was
saímos dessa
left
segunda
unproduced
revolução
for
verde, o
8 and 9
país experimentou então
months. But
a
then
sua
the
terceira
country
fase,
has
que
experimented
foi
its
a
third
implementação, já agora há 10, 15,
stage.
20 anos atrás, do uso
And
da tecnologia da
we have
ILP, que é a
also
integração
to be
lavoura,
able to
pecuária e floresta, que é
need
uma técnica,
technology,
inclusive, muito
and this is an
utilizada
area
e
which
falada
includes
pelo nosso
agriculture,
governador lá no
forest,
Mendes, no
and
estado de Mato
technology. And
Grosso,
this has
e
been
que vem
mentioned by our
ampliando cada
governor
vez
from the
mais
state
nos
of
outros
Mato Grosso,
estados da região
and
do
this
centro-oeste
has
brasileiro,
been
chamados estados como
involving
Matopiba,
the
que são os
other
estados do Maranhão, Piauí,
states of Brazil, and
Tocantins e
this
também o
includes
estado
the
da Bahia,
Maranhão,
e essa técnica
the
cada
state
vez
of
vem
Bahia,
sendo mais
and
utilizada
Tocantins.
pelos
And this
pequenos,
technique has
médios e
been more
também
and
pelos
more
grandes
used by
produtores
small, medium,
brasileiros,
and big
até nós
Brazilian
chegarmos
producers
nessa fase que nós
until
estamos,
the
que é
moment
o
where we
uso
have reached the
incessante da
phase where we
tecnologia no
are
campo,
now, which is
principalmente com o uso da
the continuous
tecnologia
use of technology,
4.0, com o
especially
uso
the
dos drones, o uso dos robôs, da
4.0, which
inteligência
has to do with the
artificial,
use of
da
drones,
big data,
robots,
o
and
uso da
artificial
informação a
intelligence, big
serviço
data, the
dos
use of
produtores rurais
information
brasileiros,
to the
claro,
service
sempre
of the
com o
rural
objetivo de auferir
producers in
maior ganho de
Brazil, with an
produtividade e
aim of
eficiência de
having
produtos.
big
E
productivity
também
gains and
a
higher
utilização da
efficiency levels. And on
biotecnologia
the other hand,
nesse
the
mesmo
use of
propósito para poder
biotechnology
abastecer o mercado interno.
in order
Nós
to
praticamente
supply the
em tudo que
internal market.
produzimos no Brasil,
And
já
everything we
perdemos
produce in
quase
Brazil
40% do que é produzido da
covers
nossa
nearly
demanda interna
40%
e quase
of our
exportamos
internal demand,
60%
and we
do que é
export
produzido em
60%
proteína
of
animal, proteína
everything we
vegetal,
produce in
nos
terms of
27
animal and
estados
vegetal
da nossa
proteins
federação.
in the 27 states of our federation.
Eu apertei aqui, mas acho que não está. Agora sim. Bom, e a radiografia de
So, and the X-ray we make of all these stages, or the so-called field revolution, is translated in the slide, which summarizes our results. This is an increase of 60% of productive area, where we have a gain of nearly 250% of our average productivity between the production of animal and vegetable proteins. And in terms of production, we have increased nearly 500%, an extraordinary leap forward that the Brazilian industry has efficiently been able to reach throughout this period of time, which totals nearly 40 to 50 years, an important historical stage that has made Brazil one of the biggest producers of the world. We have a strategic, we have also import orange, sugar, and we also produce chicken and soy and maize, and we rank the second and third position amongst those countries that produce food. And we try to balance this production with environmental conservation and preservation. This slide portrays our commitment in environmental protection. And if we consider 1/3 of our territory, nearly 30% is made of unities of protection and of our indigenous reserves, which is important to highlight. And Brazil has been trying to respect its regional communities, be they traditional. Many of them are known under the name of quilombolas, and this is a policy that the government has been developed. And we also see that other nations also deserve our respect. And this new graph clearly shows the occupation of the Brazilian territory in comparison to the US. And we have chosen the US for a simple case. They are not our biggest competitors in terms of food production, but this only goes to show that the whole of the national territory preserves 86% of our area in native vegetation, just like Brazil was when it was first discovered. So far, 66% of our territory is untouched and preserved, and we produce 30% with the use of agriculture and cattle production. So the US produce nearly 20% of their territory with vegetable productions, and they are now producing more than 2/3 of their national production.
We have a few challenges. And yesterday I was talking with the ambassador, and it's very informal, and I used an expression, and I hope that it can be translated well. Brazil is very efficient.
Saying that Brazil is very efficient indoors, inside the farm.
Land.
As far as I know, there is no other nation that is able to compete scientifically with the Brazilian producer inside the rural property, be it a small or a rural population. Our
problems are
bottlenecks
outside
are
the rural
outside the
property. So
rural
as we say,
property,
from the
and one
gate,
of these
the entry
difficulties or
gate outside.
constraints
And this is
has to do with
some
the
of the
cost
challenges that
of
we have
logistics.
to
And this
face in the
slide
next
only
few years.
clearly shows
One of these
how
challenges
Brazil,
is
how
logistics.
inefficient Brazil is in
Transport.
terms of
Brazil
its
is not
logistics. And if we
efficient
compare
in logistics.
to
And if we
the
compare
US,
ourselves with the US that has its transport via Mississippi River, Brazil is still using the roads and doing the transport via trucks, which is a lot more expensive than other modes of transport. So transport via roads cost $90 per ton. And this is a challenge. And that's why we are trying to create PPI partnerships, so private-public partnerships, to improve on logistics and improve and do not be so dependent on the road transport. We can use perhaps Tocantins, Araguaia rivers. We have over 1,000 kilometers of river that are rivers that we can use as a transport in the west of the country, central west area, going via Tocantins. And all of that can be transported to the port Conde do Pará. And we can also use better our railroads. Another challenge that we have to talk about in Brazil in terms of storage. We need to have strategies, business strategies where we can deal better with our production. Storage should be increased in Brazil. As you can see in the screen right now, we have our storage capacity in terms of our harvest of only 15%. So the storage in Brazil nowadays is 15%, and we compare that with Argentina, which is our neighbor country, is 40%. And as you can see, this data in comparison with US and Canada, Brazil is just starting on this area. So we have to improve our storage silos so we can have better prices and wait for a better moment to sell our production. And this screen here has a graph that shows how it is relevant to think about agribusiness in Brazil. You know, Brazil has a 21% of the GDP generation in the country, 43% in our exports. So 1/3 of our Brazilian economy depends on agriculture. So when we look
inicialmente aqui na nossa fala, o grande desafio que o Brasil possui, o nosso Brasil sustentável, ele está embasado em ações dentro do Congresso Nacional que são direcionadas em três eixos
our guidelines based
o eixo do investimento responsável, o eixo da compensação de áreas exploradas e o eixo da utilização de energias renováveis, energias limpas, energias sustentáveis. Dentro do primeiro eixo, que é o investimento responsável, eu queria chamar a atenção das senhoras e dos senhores para dois temas importantes.
I would like to bring your attention to 2 points. First, the award that the Brazilian government created in terms of rural financing. And this is and this award is to promote and to incentivize those producers, those growers that are respecting the legal parameters, which is respecting the margins of rivers, guaranteeing great results, and to recognize those producers, those growers who have environmental governance.
Está em debate hoje no Congresso Nacional, já foi aprovado no Senado Federal, a Casa Alta,
And we have another green paper that has been debated in the lower chambers, so Câmara dos Deputados in Brazil. And it is a project, a green paper that I created that is about buying and leasing rural property in Brazil. And as many of you know, our legislation since 2010, we had
controle do capital estrangeiro pudessem ter o domínio das áreas no Brasil. Isso, claro, que represou bilhões de reais em investimentos no nosso país.
These have generated billions of reais in Brazil, and we have this debate going on in the Congress, and we have to work with clear rules. We've been working, guaranteeing our national sovereignty. But what we want is to have a good business environment in Brazil where we can respect the legislation, our fiscal code, our forest code, and this convivial relationship that we had before 2010 can advance to have investments in Brazil to generate more food and employment. Another topic that I would like to debate is in relation to our forest code. This is a topic that that was debated for 20 years in our National Congress. In 2012, we had the largest legislation in terms of environment and what can be done and what cannot be done in the environment in Brazil. That was one of the strictest legislations in the world. And I believe that in Brazil, most of the growers, be it companies or individuals, they are working quite close to this legislation in obeying such a legislation. In 2018, I was the rapporteur of the provisionary mandate that it was in terms of environmental rural register, and we have this register of 98% of the rural properties in Brazil, and they are monitored via satellite images. This way, IBAMA and other control institutions, they have the tools to monitor these properties, and this platform has been used not only by the fiscalization organizations, but other entities who are following up the advance of environment in Brazil. I also like to mention the Green Paper, this project of law 2374 from 2020, where it is creating a number of mechanisms to recover and restore environmental areas. This is an opportunity for the growers and producers to align to the forest code. Last but not least, I would like also to talk about our energy matrix in Brazil. Our energy produced in Brazil is clean and sustainable, and it shows to you in this screen right now that 60% of the energy produced in Brazil is a renewable resource via hydroelectrics, and we had also production of energy that is from biomass is 8%, and wind energy 8%. And many countries are trying to create a green matrix. Brazil actually has 60% of clean energy in the country. I would like also to bring a good news to all of you. We are about to approve in the Brazilian Congress. This has been already approved in the lower house, and we are creating a new funding law. And this regulatory benchmark for funding of rural properties, there is a gap in this area, and we have to solve this passive to create responsibilization to these people. These people live in the land, but they do not have the legal titles to that. And without these legal titles, we cannot punish those that commit crimes. If the title of such property is not linked to a person, we cannot apport responsibility in relation to such a property. What we don't want is people to be at the margin of the law or at the shadow of the union. And that's why the Congress is putting an effort to approve such a law to create a titularization of these properties. We have over 1 million people in Brazil living in land, living on the land, but without having the title for such a land. This is an announcement that will be made by the government at COP26, and the government will commit to reduce illegal deforestation. The target before it was 2030, but now Brazil will commit to reduce deforestation until 2025. So this is a very strong commitment that Brazil will make during COP26. And I think that you talk in Europe about zeroing, so bringing to zero the deforestation, and that's what we're going to do. I will end my speech now. Thank you to all of you for their attention.
The next speaker, Fernando Camargo, is the Vice Minister for Innovation, Rural Development and Irrigation of the Ministry of Agriculture, Livestock and Food Supply of Brazil.
Good morning, everyone. I am Fernando Camargo. I am the Secretariat of the Agriculture Minister, and I am talking on behalf of our Minister, Mrs. Carvalho. I would like to thank all the authorities here present and greet all of you this morning in this beautiful building to talk about sustainability and production. This building has the ceiling green, and that was just a coincidence. We are just about to start COP26, and all of us are working to get solutions for the planet. And reading about that, and I found a good book from Bill Gates. I don't know if any of you read this book. It's a book that I recommend to all of you. When I was reading Bill Gates' book, I was reading about the fact that we have to communicate and clarify to people what type of the agriculture that we produce in Brazil is completely different from the agriculture in the north that you do here in the north. Our agriculture is based on the tropical climate, and our agriculture was based on the adaptation to the tropical heat. This has been described in this document that you have received. And this document that you have in your hands, in your folder at the moment, talks about this adaptation that we've did in Brazilian agriculture. In the last 50 years, Brazil achieved a green revolution in agriculture, as it was mentioned by the governor Irajá. Brazil export 800 million food worldwide. And in the 60s, 1960s, Brazil was a net importer of food. And for Brazil, the food for the households represent 60% of the budget. So at that point, the Brazilian state took a decision based in two pillars: create an institution that would research food and food production. This is Embrapa that is represented here today. And also to invest in rural extension to disseminate science. And these were the factors that created the agriculture or the agri-revolution in Brazil. And to achieve food safety in Brazil, we had three pillars that were responsible for this extension. We have the correction of our soil in the center west in Brazil, that we had an acid soil, so we needed to correct that. We had to also develop productive systems that were adapted to the tropical climate. Brazil, our productivity in Brazil improved 400%, and our agricultural area increased only 40–50%. This is what we have to communicate to the world. And of course, Bill Gates has a chapter in his book that says how to produce food in the world, and we hope that he mentioned that, how we are doing things in Brazil in the next book. We are also working towards decarbonization, and Bill Gates talked about two numbers that create the magnitude of this challenge. We have this goal of achieving zero carbon emission, and to achieve the goals of reducing the heating from 2% to 1%. So Gates talked about two challenges, which is like the reduction of methane that is emitted by the cattle, which is quite polluting. And another challenge that Gates talked about is in relation to nitrogen, which is essential in agriculture and also has a polluting effect. So I will talk about these challenges that Gates has proposed to us with certain optimism and based in our technological knowledge in the Brazilian agriculture sector. Brazil has the best technology in agriculture, and 10 years ago, we created a plan that is called agriculture, low carbon agriculture. And these technologies goes from using integrated systems like the ones shown by the senator, Irajá, and governor. We can have in the same space livestock, wood production, and agriculture. And we have also the treatment of animal waste that is used a lot here in Europe. And in this period, we have used these different technologies in 50 million hectares in Brazil, mitigating over 670,000 tons carbon. When we talk about the methane challenge, when we have the same area producing livestock agriculture, we have these techniques being very good in neutralizing. So we have the livestock emitting methane, but the agriculture can decarbonize such a So when we talk about the pastures being very well managed, we can have 2 animals per hectare, and with the intensive husbandry, we can have a precocious or early production of beef. So the carbon neutral beef produced in Brazil is already being exported to Argentina, and we expect to have carbon neutral beef exported worldwide. And this is all to deal with the green gases emissions. Gates has talked about a more rational use of nitrogen. In relation to that, Brazil created an innovation called biological fixation of nitrogen, and Dr. Moretti will talk about that later on today. So we have new inputs that create the incorporation of nitrogen in the soil, taking it from the air. And with that, we do not need to use hydrogenated pesticide, and this means that 50% of the hydrogen, it won't go to the air, it will be incorporated within the soil. And in 2020, the use of biological fixation of nitrogen saved 160,000 tons of carbon emissions. So can you imagine when we start using that in all the hectares that we produce soybean today? Last year, Brazil has also created the program of bio inputs, and that is via concession to the producers and growers. And in the last 20 years, the Ministry of Agriculture registered hundreds of biological products, and this is a number that is higher than pesticides. So we have to highlight that, and we believe that our market will grow by the rate of 20% until 2030. Brazilian agriculture has been seeking and achieving solutions, and in the last 10 years, we have changed our low-carbon agriculture, and our objective is to expand such a technology to the other areas that is equivalent to 3 United Kingdoms. And with that, we are going to save 1 million tons of carbon emissions. Brazil has 126 hectares with just 1% of degradation. And in the last few years, we have restored and recovered these areas of pastures, and we expect that in the last 10 years, we are going to recover 30% more of these pastures areas without any need of deforestation. We need to stop the increase of the world heating. And can I have a water? Thank you. We need to reduce the warming of the planet. But when we look at that, Brazil produces, we had 1 billion tons of productions of fibers and proteins. We export our products for 193 countries, and we are doing that based in a production process that is decarbonizing. And then is that we have to talk about with the world and talk about with Bill Gates. We are in the era of decarbonizations, and we are doing that based on scientific factors and aiming to get food safety. And I wish all of you a very good event. Thank you.